Good afternoon. You are with the District Compass today, and today we have Kristen Nichols joining us. How are you today, Kristen?
I'm fabulous. Thank you very much.
That's great. Good to hear. Glad you could join us today. Kristen, something I hear a lot from our members in District 21 is that it can be difficult to visualize the paths in pathways. When we hold a manual, when we can't hold a manual in our hands, it can be tougher to understand the paths and how they are laid out and what the learning objectives are. I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
I would be happy to speak to that. I can so relate. It's true. Without being able to hold that physical manual in our hands, it's really hard to sort of get a feel for how the path is constructed, where it's headed, a GPS, if you will. And particularly for people who are visual, it's really hard to know where you're going if you can't see the path that's laid out for you. And so I think that it would be worthwhile to start answering your question by giving you some idea of how each path is structured, because there's a lot of patterns in pathways. And once you start to understand and be able to see the patterns, it makes it so much easier to understand where you're headed and how the paths are laid out for you. So to begin, we all know that there's 5 levels. We've been in pathways long enough to know that there are 5 levels, and 5 levels and a completion project, actually. So there's actually sort of 5 and a bit levels before you've completely finished a path. And you may not even realize this, but each level in every path, all 11 paths, and hopefully more to come, they all have a theme for each level. So it's like a building block. If you think about those little toys that babies use, where they put rings on a stick and they start with the biggest one and go upwards to make a little pyramid. Level 1 is all about the fundamentals. It's about mastering fundamentals. So it doesn't matter which path you're on and you're working on. Level 1 is about mastering fundamentals. Level 2 is, so I'm going to call it introspection. It's an analysis, a self-analysis of learning styles. And depending on what path you're on, it could be your leadership style or your communication style, but it is about looking inwards and doing some self-assessing. So it's about understanding your learning styles. And again, it doesn't matter which path, they all have the same theme. Number 3 is building on your knowledge. So number 3 is filled with new experiences, depending on which electives you choose and how you've tailored the path to yourself. And it's about increasing your knowledge base. So again, doesn't matter which path you're on. All the projects are different depending on which of the 11 paths you're on, but level 3 will always be about increasing your knowledge. Level 4 is building skills on that knowledge. So it's taking the knowledge and applying it in skillful ways. And that's why most of the level 4 projects are all about things like team building and leading teams and organizing events and doing things like that, because you're taking the knowledge you learned in level 3 and you're building on it. And then in level 5, you are demonstrating your expertise for everything you've learned so far. And then you do a self-reflection after you finish level 5. So that is the pattern that's true for every path. But what some people may not realize is that the whole program of pathways incorporates 5 core competencies, 5, and they're all blended together and they're peppered throughout each path. There's a really terrific graphic that I'll mention later as soon as I come to a close, that talks about the 5 core competencies, and it shows you where they show up in each of your paths. So depending on what kind of skills you want to build and what core competencies and values are important to you, you can choose your path accordingly and choose your electives accordingly, so that whatever path you're on, it's unique to your learning experience. That to me is the beauty of pathways. I loved the legacy program, but we didn't get this in legacy. So what are those 5 core competencies? Well, certainly most of us came to Toastmasters to learn public speaking. And so that is definitely one of them. And one of the, well, they're all important, but I think that the public speaking, it shows up in pretty much every path. Interpersonal communication is the second one. Strategic leadership is the third one. Management is the fourth one, and confidence is number 5. So public speaking, interpersonal communication, strategic leadership, management, and confidence. Not every path has all 5 of those competencies, although you could build them into every path depending on your electives. However, an example, engaging humor, it teaches public speaking and confidence. Those are the primary core competencies that you're going to gain if you choose engaging humor path. However, when I chose engaging humor, I wanted to add some leadership. So I was careful to choose my electives to make sure that leadership and some interpersonal communication kinds of competencies were built into the path that I did, made it my own. Dynamic leadership, on the other hand, it's built on public speaking, communication, leadership, and confidence. So it actually already has 4 of the 4 core competencies already built in. And you'll notice in that one, management is missing. One of the comments that I often hear about pathways is that it seems to be built for people with corporate jobs or people in the workforce, and it doesn't apply to people outside the workforce. And I don't think that that's quite accurate, because you'll notice that depending on the path you've chosen, some of those, what I'm going to call corporate type skills, they're not in that path unless you build them in. The competencies that path is focusing on are totally transferable to any area of life. It's not necessarily corporate. So if your path is heavily weighted in the management core competency, maybe you're not in quite the right path for you, and maybe you could consider moving to a different path that carries a different competency. So the graphic that shows the core competencies and where they naturally fall and show up in each path is on the Toastmasters website. If you go to Home and Resources and go to the resource library, which is a wealth of information. Imagine having our own library. Well, we do. What you have to look for, to type in the keyword paths and core competencies. So that's Home, Resources, Resource Library. And then where it says type in a keyword, type in paths and core competencies. And you get this brilliant graphic that outlines the competencies, where they show up in each path, and then gives you some suggestions for each path, lays out all the electives for each path so that you can build your own path and learning experience that touches on the core competencies that are really important to you. You'll see that the foundational building blocks for each path are, in fact, the core competencies. Every path and every project is built around a focus on making sure that you gain those competencies or skills that are important to you. It's the way to make the path fully your own. And I hope that this helps you to understand that the patterns that exist within the Pathways program are designed specifically to not only take a core set of competencies and values and build paths around those competencies, but then to go through level 1 through 5, building from the bottom up on a certain set of skills, mastering those fundamentals, learning your learning styles or your communication styles, increasing your knowledge, building your skills, demonstrating your expertise, and then self-assessing to have a look at your path and do some reflection on what you gained and what you might do differently. Does that answer your question?
Boy, does that ever answer my questions. I'm glad I showed up today. I learned a ton. We did another podcast earlier with Stefano Casalter, and he talked about re-engineering your path by starting at what is the project that you want to do at the end of your path and being able to sort of map it out according to the things that you want to do. And he talked about a situation where he wanted to get a government grant to help his business in what he was trying to do. And so he had to
Ah,
take a look at it and engineer it that way. So when you pick a path and you know that you've got the core competencies, it sounds to me like you're on the right track, and then you can actually build your entire path based on something that you're trying to do. Like perhaps you want to write a book or something like that. Well,
yes.
thank you very much. That was really informative, and I'm sure our members are going to be so delighted that your email is just going to be going crazy. Thank you for
Oh,
joining us today.
thank you for asking me. Anytime there's any question about pathways or wanting comments about pathways, I'm your girl.
All right. Thank you.